This is Algebra 1 class, and we're going to be looking at factoring trinomials when the leading coefficient of the trinomial is not equal to 1. So when the leading coefficient is not equal to 1, the middle term gets a little tricky to figure out, and we're going to use a method which I call the box method to see how that works out. So as we're looking at the trinomial 2x squared minus 13x plus 6, we know that our first terms of our binomials have to multiply to give us 2x squared. And our last terms of our binomials have to multiply to get us 6. The outer and the inner terms have to add up to negative 13x. So we're going to focus on our first term and our last term. And to do that in our box, we're going to write our first term, 2x squared, above the first column, and the 6, the constant or the last term, above the last box. And this outer and inner term, this middle term, this negative 13x, is going to go off here to the side. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the ways to multiply to get 2x squared. So 2x squared, we can get that by doing 2x multiplied by 1x. And then we look at our choices for multiplying to get 6. We know 6 is going to be 1 and 6, or 2 times 3. And since my middle term has to be a negative, we need to have both negative factors. So now I'm going to try things. It may or may not work. That's why I have a pencil and an eraser so that I can erase if something doesn't work. Okay, so we're just going to try some factors. Let's see what happens if I try negative 2 and negative 3 as my pair. So I'm going to try negative 2 and negative 3. And I'm going to multiply across. In this row, I'm going to multiply these two values. I get 2x times negative 2x is negative 4x. And x times negative 3 is negative 3x. And then I want to add to see if it works. Negative 4x plus negative 3x does not equal negative 13x. So our choice here of negative 2 and negative 3 didn't work. So that's our first try. We're going to erase that because that one didn't work. Okay, let's see what would happen if I use those same factors, but I just switched them. I did negative 3x and negative 2x. Again, multiplying across, I have negative 6x and negative 2x. That still doesn't add up to negative 13. So let's try the other pair of factors. Let's try the negative 1 and the negative 6. And maybe think ahead a little bit. Remember, my goal is to get to negative 13. So if I take 2 and I multiply it by the factor negative 6, that gives me negative 12x. And then I take the 1 and multiply it by the other factor of negative 1, I get negative 1x, and I do add up to negative 13x. So my two binomials are going to go diagonally across here. I want to take the binomial 2x minus 1 multiplied by the binomial x minus 6. And if I check that, we're going to have first 2x times x. Outer is the 2x times the negative 6. We did that right here. So outer 2x times negative 6 is negative 12x. Inner is the negative 1 times 1x. Again, that was our pair here. That gave us negative x. And the last, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 6. So we have the correct first term of 2x squared. We have the correct last term of 6. Our outer and inner, negative 12 and negative 1, do add up to negative 13x. Okay, let's try some more like that. This time our first term is 3n squared. And our last term is negative 5. And our middle term, which is our goal, is 14n. There's only one way to get 3n squared. It's just 3n times 1n. And now I have factors that multiply to give negative 5. So I can have 1 and negative 5 or negative 1 and 5. My goal is to match them so I have a positive 14n. As I'm thinking about what I should multiply to get the 3n, I'm thinking I need a big positive number because my goal is a positive number. So as I look at my choices, I think I want to use this pair and take the 3 multiplied by the 5, because 3 times 5 is 15n. And now my other factor of 5, negative 1. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1n, and 15 plus negative 1n is 14n. So I've chosen the correct factors, and the binomials are here. So I have 3n minus 1 multiplied by n plus 5. It doesn't matter which one of these pairs you write first. They're just different factors, and they can be multiplied or written in either order. Okay, let's do another one. This one's a little trickier because it has a negative leading coefficient. So instead of keeping that negative leading coefficient, one of the things that we can do with that is we can actually factor out the negative 1 first. This is give you the easiest method for factoring. So factoring out the negative 1 leaves us with 4x squared minus 12x minus 7. And now we're going to put our terms in our box to factor. We want to multiply to get 4x squared. That's our first term. Our last term is negative 7. And the middle term, which is our goal, is negative 12x. Now 4x, we have some choices. We could do 4 and 1, or we could do 2 and 2. So we have to choose, and it might be kind of a guess to start with. So let's just try 2 and 2 to start with. And if things don't work out, we can change them. Our factors of negative 7 are going to be 1 and 7, but one has to be positive and one has to be negative. A positive times a negative is required to get a negative answer. And again, our goal is negative 12. So let's see. What can I try here? Well, these two are the same, so it doesn't really matter which order you put them in. Let's try 7 and 1. And since I want to have a negative answer, let's make this bigger number negative. So as I multiply across, 2x times negative 7 is negative 14x. And 2x times 1 is 2x, and they do add up to negative 12. So here, again, are my factors. 2x plus 1 multiplied by 2x minus 7. Okay? Let's do that again. Oh, and wait a minute, before we do that, we still have the factor negative 1. So negative 1 times 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 7. Okay, let's do another one where we have a negative leading coefficient. We're going to start it the same way. We're going to factor out the negative 1 first, leaving us with 3x squared plus x minus 2. And now our first term is positive 3x squared. Our last term is negative 2. And our goal is to get positive 1x in the middle. To multiply to get 3x squared, I have 3x and 1x. To multiply to get negative 2, I only have really one pair. It's just which one's positive and which one's negative. Okay? And my goal, of course, is to get positive 1x. It will make a difference which one I put in each of these boxes because they're multiplied by different terms over here. So if I tried the 2 and the 1, make that negative, notice what would happen. I get 3 times 2 is 6x, and 1x times negative 1 is negative 1x, and I only end up with 5x, and my goal is to get 1x. So pairing the 2 with the 3 didn't work. Let's switch these around. let's pair the 1 with the 3 and make it a positive 1. So 3x times 1 is positive 3x. 1x times negative 2 is negative 2x. And these two do add up to x. So our two binomials are here. 3x minus 2, x plus 1. All right, let's do a couple more. Let's look at a slightly different method. I like to call it the SMILE method, and see if we can factor these as well. In this method, we're going to write down our framework of the two binomials that we want to multiply to get our trinomial 4m squared plus 9m plus 5. We're going to start by listing our factors of the leading of our first term of the 4m squared. So I'm going to list our factors, 1 and 4, 2 and 2. And then we also have our factor for our last term, which is 5, and our factors multiply to 1 and 5. And the SMILE method works like this. We have first and last, and then we have our outer and our inner. See, we got a little smiley face going on here. The outer and the inner term have to add up to 9m. So I'm going to be looking at this inner term and this outer term and see how I end up with 9m. Let's start with our first term. I need to multiply to get 4m squared. Well, I can choose 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. Since my middle term is odd, this is an odd term, I know that I can't add up to get odd numbers when I'm using evens. So I'm going to have to choose the 1 and the 4. 1x and 4x. Now I need to figure out how to pair up my factors of 5 in order to get my outer term and my inner term to add to 9x. Notice my inner term, the 4x, has to be multiplied by one of these factors. If I take 4 times the 5, I'm too big. It's already bigger than 9. So the 4 can't be paired with the 5. Instead, let's pair the 4 with the 1. The inner term, 4 times 1. And our outer term, 1 times 5. Inner term is 4x. Outer term is 5x. And yes, I get a result of 9x, like we required or like we wanted. So our two binomials then, x plus 1 times 4x plus 5. Okay. Let's go ahead now and factor and solve an equation. So the first thing I have to do is make sure one side is equal to 0, and it is. And then I want to take this trinomial and I want to factor it into two binomials. So let's do that. Let's try our SMILE method again and see how that works. Factors of 4x squared. Actually, before I even do this SMILE method, let's take a look at a common factor first. Look at those three terms. 4x squared minus 2x minus 90. Each one of those terms has a common factor of 2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out the greatest common factor of 2. So that gives us 2 times 2x squared minus x minus 45. And that equals 0. By factoring out a common factor, it makes factoring the trinomial extremely more easily done. So now I just have this trinomial. Now all I need to do is look at the factors of 2 instead of the factors of 4. There's only one choice of factors for 2. It has to be 2x and 1x. This is our first term. First and our last, inner and our outer. My inner and outer, the goal is to add them to negative x. So let's see what factors we have for negative 45. We want to pair them up with our inner and our outer to get negative 1x. So let's list the factors of negative 45. We have plus and minus 1 and 45, plus and minus 3 and 15, plus and minus 5 and 9, and plus or minus, no, that's it, right? Yes, those are our pairs. Okay, now I don't want those to add up to negative x. I need those paired up with my outer and my inner to add up to negative x. So 2 has to be multiplied by whatever factor I write here, and the 1 has to be paired with this one. So my goal when I'm looking at these, I need to only have a negative 1x. I'm looking at this pair right here. If I take 2 times 5, that gives me 10. And if I have 9 times 1, that gives me 9. I need to have negative x, so this term would need to be negative. So that 5 would need to be negative. 2x times negative 5x is negative 10x. 9 times 1x is 9x. They add to negative x. So we have 2 times 2x plus 9 times x minus 5 equal to 0. The factor 2 can't be 0, so the 2x plus 9 can be 0, or the x minus 5 equals 0. Solving, we have 2x equals negative 9, x equals negative 4.5, or x equals 5. So our two solutions are x equals negative 4.5 or x equals 5. Okay? Let's do another one. Let's solve two more problems. This one, we'll notice one side's not equal to 0, so the first thing we're going to do is subtract 14 from both sides. We get 6y squared minus 5y minus 14 equals 0. There isn't a common factor of these three, so this is we don't have a common factor to take out, so let's factor this into two binomials. And let's go ahead and use our box method and see how that would work out with this one. Let's draw a box. Our first term is 6y squared. Our last term is negative 14. And our goal for our middle term is negative 5y. So factors to multiply to 6 would be 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Factors for negative 14, plus and minus 1 and 14, and plus and minus 2 and 7. So now we get to just kind of choose what we think might be a good pair to come up with our terms of negative 5. How about we choose the 2 and the 3 because they're kind of close together. So 2y and 3y. And now I have to pick pairs to see how I can get negative 5. Well, if I take 2 times the 7, I'm up at negative 14, so I don't know that that looks good. How about the 2 times the 2? How about if I use this pair and do the 2 times the 2 and the 3 times the 7? Well, make one of those negative, and I end up with 4y minus 21y. Great. That's not anywhere close to negative 5y. How about if we switch them? If we put the 7 and the 2 and make this one negative. So now we have negative 14y plus 6y. This is certainly closer, but it's not negative 5. And in fact, it's even. Okay? Because we have our evens factors split up. So that didn't work. What about the 1 and 14 before I abandon the 2 and 3? What about using 1 and 14? Well, I don't want to get too big, so let's take the 2 times the 14 and the 1 and the 3. And gosh, we can see right off. We have negative 28 plus 3. That's nowhere near negative 5. Okay, so where do we go? Well, this 2 and this 3 didn't work. Our first choice here for our factors for our first term using 2 and 3 didn't work. Now I have to try the 1 and the 6. You see why a pencil is helpful for this? Let's see what I can do with the 1 and the 6. So if I take the 7 and the 2, and I want the bigger one to be negative, so 6 times 2 is going to be the bigger one, so let's make that negative 12y. The 6 times 2 is farther from 0, and then this one the positive, and now I get my negative 5y. Sometimes it takes some trial and error and some checking to see what works. As you get better at it, you'll make good first choices and it won't take as long to factor. Okay, so here are our factors that we're working with. We have y minus 2 and 6y plus 7 equal to 0. Set each factor equal to 0, y minus 2 equals 0, or 6y plus 7 equals 0. That gives us y equals 2, or in this case, 6y equals negative 7, y is negative 7, 6. So our two solutions, y equals 2 or y equals negative 7 over 6. One last example and then we'll be done for today's lesson. We want to find the zeros of the function. Again, that means I want to make the function value, the h of x, equal to 0. So I want to solve 0 equals negative 3x squared plus 2x plus 5. I have a negative first term, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1 first. So factoring out negative 1, we have negative 3x squared divided by negative 1 is 3x squared. 2x divided by negative 1, negative 2x. And 5 divided by negative 1 is negative 5. And now let's go ahead and factor this again. Let's use the smile method so we can look at each one to see how it works. We're going to look at two factors here. And we have our first and our last, our outer and our inner. And our goal on the outer and inner is to get negative 2x. So in order to get our first term of 3x squared, I have to have a 3x and a 1x. And now I have my factors of negative 5, have to be 1 and 5, one positive, one negative. My goal is to see which one do I multiply to the 3, which one do I multiply to the 1x to get a goal of negative 2. So as I'm thinking, if I do put the 5 there, the 3 times 5 is 15, and that's really big. So let's switch those. Let's put the 5 here and the 1 there. Remember, one of them needs to be negative. So let's check to see which one has to be negative. We have 5 times x is 5x, and 3x times 1 is 3x. If I want this to add up to negative 2, this term with the negative 5x needs to be negative. So negative 5 plus 1. So this factors into the equation 0 equals negative 1 times 3x minus 5 times x plus 1. Negative 1 can't be 0, so we have our choice 3x minus 5 equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. Adding 5, 3x equals 5. Dividing by 3, x equals 5/3. Subtracting 1, x equals negative 1. So our two choices for x is either equal to 5/3 or x is equal to negative 1. And that's factoring when the coefficient of the first term of the leading term is not 1. Thanks for watching.